The air shimmered like glass when we started that morning. One of those desert dawns where the sun comes up like it's been waiting all night to ambush you. There were 4 of us: me, Clara, Vince, and young Drew, our newest tag-along, full of energy and optimism that hadn't yet been cooked out of him by the high desert heat. We'd been trekking 3 days across the San Rafael Swell in Utah, following an old route I'd taken years before. The plan was simple: hit Little Dog Spring by noon, refill our water, then push another few miles to camp under the cliffs at Chimney Wash. It was a good plan, carefully built around the handful of reliable springs that dotted the map like precious little blue gems. By mid-morning, the land had turned to rippled sandstone and dry wash gullies, painted in red and ochre. The heat built slow and steady until it felt like we were walking through invisible syrup. When we crested the last ridge above the spring, I remember Clara saying, "I can hear it, listen." But what we heard wasn't running water. It was the thin whistle of wind scraping through dry reeds. The creek bed below us was nothing but cracked mud. The spring hole, a shallow bowl of dust and brittle grass. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The sun bore down like judgment. I knelt where the water used to bubble, scraping at the dry crust with my fingers. Not even a hint of dampness. Drew finally broke the silence. "It's gone?" His voice cracked, the word itself absurd. That spring had been running for decades, probably longer. But the winter had been dry, and the heat this season had come early and mean. We counted what we had left, just over 2 litres between the 4 of us. We'd planned to arrive full and refill to the brim here, so none of us had rationed. Vince's shirt was already salt-streaked, his lips cracking white. I looked at the topo map, the lines warped from sweat, and weighed our choices. The nearest known source was 12 miles east, an old cattle trough at Cottonwood Tank. The direct path was over open slick rock, no shade, no cover, and no guarantee the tank wasn't dry too. The only other chance was a narrow canyon to the north, unnamed and unmarked, that might catch seepwater if we were lucky. "North it is," I said finally, trying to sound certain. "We'll travel light, move at dusk, rest in the shade until then." We scraped a little sand hollow under a ledge and waited out the worst of the sun, tongues sticking to the roofs of our mouths, each of us silently listening for a sound that never came, the burble of water that used to be. We moved out as the sun began its slow descent, the light bleeding gold across the sandstone. The heat didn't let up much, but at least the glare softened. Each of us carried what little water remained, half a bottle apiece, sipped so carefully you could hear the air slip back through the plastic afterward. It's strange how the mind changes when water runs short. Every trickle you imagine becomes a promise. Every shimmer on the horizon looks like salvation. The canyon mouth was barely visible, a dark slash in the cliffs ahead. We picked our way down, following dry washes that twisted through the red rock like the paths of vanished rivers. I led the way, map folded into quarters in my back pocket, though it might as well have been a talisman by then. The ground radiated heat even after sunset, and the air smelled like dust and iron. Our boots scuffed over pebbles and brittle sage stems, each sound louder in the silence. When we finally entered the canyon, the world changed. The air cooled a little, and the walls rose close enough that we could touch both sides with outstretched arms. Clara stopped and pressed her fingers to a smooth patch of rock, closing her eyes. "This used to be a creek," she said softly. You could see where the water had carved channels, now dry and glinting with salt crust. We scouted every shadow, every bend where moisture might hide. At one point, we found a hollow beneath a boulder where the sand looked slightly darker. Drew fell to his knees and started digging with his hands, hopeful. The rest of us joined in, scraping until our nails filled with grit. We got maybe a palmful of damp sand, just enough to darken the dust on our skin. Vince cursed under his breath, then wiped his face with his sleeve. "Keep moving," I told them, though my throat burned too. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples, a heavy thud that matched the crunch of our steps. The canyon narrowed into a slot, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Overhead, the strip of sky deepened into violet. Somewhere ahead came the faint flutter of wings. Bats, maybe, or something else, drawn to places where insects might still hover near moisture. That tiny sound gave me hope. We followed it deeper, stumbling through the dimness, until Clara pointed at a shadowed wall streaked with mineral stains. "See that? Water used to run there." She wasn't wrong. There were marks like tear tracks down the rock, pale against the red. We pressed our hands to them, but they were dry as bone. By the time we made camp on a patch of flat sand, the stars were out and our tongues were swollen. We sat in silence around a cold circle of stones, conserving strength, not bothering to light a fire. Every breath seemed to pull moisture straight from our lungs. I lay back and watched the constellations wheel overhead, trying to remember the sound of a creek in motion, the trickle, the gurgle, the life of it. Tomorrow, we'd have to find more than hope. I woke to the sound of wind sighing through the canyon. A low, hollow breath that almost sounded like running water if you wanted to believe it badly enough. My throat was sandpaper, my lips stuck together. Clara was already awake, staring toward the east, where the first light touched the rim of the cliffs. Her face was pale under a layer of red dust, eyes sunk deep. Vince was sitting cross-legged nearby, shaking his last few drops of water into the cap of his bottle before licking them clean. Drew didn't stir until the sun reached his boots. He was young, but exhaustion had carved lines into his face overnight. "We can't stay here," I said, though it was obvious. The canyon walls offered shade, but they also trapped heat once the sun got high. I unfolded the map again, the paper soft and damp from sweat. The cattle tank lay east, still about 10 miles, a long shot, but the only clear mark left. Between us and that, there was a ridge, bare, sun-blasted, with no shelter for hours. We set out before the light turned harsh, following the canyon floor until it widened and spilled into open desert. Every step sent dust puffing around our boots. The air shimmered, the horizon rippled, and the silence was complete except for the rasp of our breathing. At one point, Drew stumbled and went to one knee. Clara was beside him in an instant, helping him up, her hand trembling. I offered him my canteen, knowing it was a mistake but unable to watch him suffer. He took one swallow, maybe two, then handed it back with eyes full of apology. By midday, the sun was a hammer. We wrapped bandanas around our necks, soaked in the faint damp of morning dew wrung from a scrap of cloth, but it evaporated before we could feel it. Somewhere in the distance, heat waves made the mesas dance like mirages. "There," Vince said suddenly, pointing. Against the glare, a shimmer looked like water pooled at the base of a low hill. We half ran, half stumbled toward it, hearts pounding with desperate hope. It wasn't water, just a patch of pale clay, smooth as glass, reflecting the sky. We stood around it, defeated, breathing hard. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Clara laughed once, a dry, brittle sound that didn't belong to her. I wanted to be angry, but it was better than crying. As the afternoon stretched on, the ground changed. Less rock, more sand. Our footprints vanished almost as soon as we made them. The wind began to pick up, whispering across the flats. We were too tired to talk. I tried to focus on small things, the crunch of gravel, the pattern of lizard tracks, the strange sweetness of creosote in the air. Anything to keep my mind from the thirst clawing at me. When the sun finally dipped low again, I saw the ridge ahead, dark against the orange sky. "If we can make that by nightfall," I rasped, "we'll see the tank from the top." None of us answered. We just kept walking, shadows stretching long behind us, toward the faint promise of survival. We reached the base of the ridge as night swallowed the horizon. My legs felt hollow, as if the bones inside had turned to reeds. Each of us was moving on something beyond reason. Momentum, stubbornness, maybe fear. The air cooled fast, that desert trick where the heat just drops away like a curtain falling. It should have been a relief, but the chill only made my body tremble with fatigue. The ridge wasn't steep, just relentless. A slow grind over loose rock and scraggly tufts of sage. Halfway up, Vince stopped and leaned on his trekking pole, breathing hard. "Go on," he croaked. "I'll catch up." But we knew he wouldn't if we left him. Clara dropped her pack and took his arm, and we moved together, 3 of us supporting one another, while Drew scouted a few steps ahead. The moon had risen, pale and ghostly, lighting the rock with silver. By the time we crested the top, the stars had burned bright overhead. So many they blurred together like frost. I pulled out the map again, tracing our position by instinct. The tank should have been just below, maybe a mile out, where the land flattened into a shallow basin. My heart thudded. "Down there," I whispered. And then, by some miracle, I saw it. A dark shape catching moonlight, circular, metallic. We almost ran. Drew reached it first, falling to his knees beside the trough, his hands scraping the rim. I stumbled after him, hope roaring in my chest, then stopped cold. The tank was bone dry. Inside, dust swirled in the faint wind. A metal pipe jutted from the rim, twisted and broken. It hadn't held water in months, maybe longer. Clara sank down beside it, silent. Vince cursed weakly, voice breaking. I could feel my throat closing, not just from thirst, but from the gut punch of despair. I'd led them here. I'd promised water. Now, there was nothing left to believe in. For a long time, none of us moved. The desert around us seemed endless, the kind of silence that makes you feel small, forgotten. Then, faintly, I caught a sound, the rustle of wings, a nightjar swooping low. It circled once, twice, then vanished into the dark. Birds needed water. Maybe it was heading somewhere. "Wait," I said, straining to listen. There, a faint trickle? Or just wind through the brush? I couldn't tell, but something in me refused to quit. "We follow it," I said. "Birds don't fly for nothing out here." Drew looked at me, eyes glassy but trusting. Clara nodded, slow and weary. Vince just sighed and pushed himself upright. We started walking again, downhill into the darkness, guided by moonlight and the faint rhythm of wings that might have been real or imagined. Each step was agony, but hope, thin as it was, pulled us forward. Somewhere in that dry silence, I swore I could hear it again. The ghost of running water, teasing us just beyond reach. The land leveled out into a shallow wash, wide and pale under the moon. The air carried a coolness we hadn't felt in days, the kind that makes the skin prickle and whisper that maybe, just maybe, something alive was near. We followed the wash downstream, feet dragging through powdery sand. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hush, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. Then Clara stopped. "Do you smell that?" she murmured. I lifted my head, sniffed the air. Something faint, earthy, almost metallic. Wet stone. My heart stuttered. We moved faster, stumbling through the darkness until we reached a bend in the wash. There, tucked between boulders, was a shallow depression no bigger than a bathtub. In it, water, thin and dark, barely a few inches deep, but real. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hand into it. Cold. Blessedly cold. The others crowded close, each of us taking turns to drink small mouthfuls, slow and careful, like it was sacred. It tasted of iron and dust and life. Clara wept silently, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. Vince just kept murmuring, "Thank God, thank God," over and over. Drew lay back on the sand afterward, laughing softly into the night sky. We stayed there till dawn, filling our bottles with what we could filter and watching the sunlight creep over the horizon. When it finally reached us, it didn't feel cruel anymore, just warm, like a promise kept. The little seep wasn't much, but it was enough to get us back to the main canyon 2 days later, following the wash until it met the ghost of an old riverbed. From there, we found a trailhead and, eventually, the truck we'd left parked beneath a lone cottonwood. Back in town, after water and shade and more food than we could finish, the whole ordeal began to shrink in memory, becoming almost unbelievable, like a fever dream made of dust and silence. Yet even now, when I think of that night, I remember the sound of our footsteps in the dark, the feel of the wind changing, the first shock of that cold water against my fingers. It wasn't the hardest trip I've ever had, but it was the one that stripped things down to their simplest truth. Out there, every drop counts. You plan, you prepare, you trust your maps, but in the end, survival comes from paying attention to the smallest signs, the faintest clues that life still stirs beneath the stone. Sometimes, when I pour a glass of water now, I still pause a second before drinking, just long enough to remember what it's worth. The desert taught me that much. Thirst isn't just in the throat, it's in the will to keep moving, even when the map says there's nothing left ahead but dust.